Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to show you my pizza dough recipe. If you don't like putting in a little bit of work, then you're not going to enjoy this recipe. There's going to be a few little tricks I'm going to show you along the way, a few little methods I'm going to show you rather than tricks, because there's nothing special here, there's nothing stand out. I'm just going to show you the simplest way to make pizza dough that is guaranteed, whether you're using a pizza oven or you're using it in the conventional oven in the house. This recipe is gonna focus on two main things. Number one is work. By work, I mean kneading, obviously. You don't need to knead for 20 minutes, you really don't. There'll be a lot of people that tell you need to knead for 20 minutes, 25 minutes, or you need to have your machine on for that long, but you don't. Right, as I was saying, it's a simple recipe, traditional Neapolitan pizza. So, flour. I'll put the link to this in the comments below. Yeast, so I've only got dried yeast, just as good, or not just as good, but does the job. Salt and water. So let's say I'm going to do the full recipe. Today I'm going to do half because I'm not making 6 dough balls for myself. A kilogram of flour. First thing, that's 100%, always 100%, and by that I mean when I'm using baker's percentages, everything is worked against the flour as 100%, so you're working as a percentage of the flour, yeah? So the yeast, slightly more to it than the salt and the water. If I'm going to make this and eat this today, which I am going to in this case, I'm going to use a little bit more yeast, which means today I'm going to use 1%. And that is using fresh yeast, I should mention. Key. So 1% of 1 kilogram is 10 grams of salt, 10 grams of yeast. But because I'm using dried yeast, that is half of that 1%. So I guess I could really do 0.5%. So I'm using 5 grams of active yeast if I'm using a kilogram of flour. Today I'm halving the recipe, so that's 2.5 grams of dried active yeast. Simple, yeah? Salt, very simple. I use 3%. No matter what amount of flour I use 3% of that in salt. So for the full recipe, 30 grams of salt. Obviously today it's easy, I'm halving the recipe, so that's 15 grams of salt. But if you want to use a custom amount of flour, which I've been trying to work out how much flour equals how many dough balls, because I want X amount of dough balls sometimes. I might just want 1, I might want 2, I might want 4. So I've been trying to work that out. So if I want 3%, let's say I want to use 450 grams of flour, and I want to know how much salt to use. 450 times 0.03, 0.03 is 3%. That is 13.5 grams of flour. And just to show you that works, 1 kilogram times 0.03 equals 30 grams. And I'll show you again how that works with water. So today I'm going to use 65% hydration, and this is why it's so important to know the importance of hydration percentages, because you can change this to suit the weather, the temperature, the humidity, or just what your preference is really. I tend to work between 62% to 65%. 62% is the boundary for what is traditional Neapolitan. Above 62% is what is considered contemporary. If you want to say it is traditional, then it has to be no more than 62.5% hydration. Basically, again, the same thing. If I've got 1,000 grams of flour and I want 60% hydration, that's 600 grams. 60% of 1,000 is 600. In my case, I'm going to be using 65% hydration today, so that is 650 grams. But like I said, I'm halving that. So although it's easy to do in your head, a half of 650, I'm just going to show you the percentage way using a calculator. So let's say I got 325 grams of flour. 325 grams of flour times 0.65, 65% equals 211.25. Don't worry about that 0.25, really, it doesn't matter, just put 211 and round it down. But To show you again that that method works, 1000 times 0.65, 650. Simple. But I would recommend, if you're a new goer at making pizza dough, you're not familiar with working with dough, you don't know how a wet dough feels, or you might panic and chuck more flour in, don't. Start with 60% and get used to it. 60% isn't wet, it isn't too dry, you're still gonna get a nice pizza dough out of it. So start with 60% hydration at all times. And like I say, if you wanna lower your flour amount because you don't wanna make too many dough balls and then go to waste, use whatever amount of flour you want and stick to the percentages. Easy as that. So we're through the recipe. 1000 grams of flour, 600 ml of water if you're working with 60% hydration, 30 grams of salt, which is 3%, and 10 grams of fresh yeast or 5 grams of dry yeast, which is 1%. Only if you are eating it the same day. I've got the water here. In my case, this is 65% hydration. Remember that, because when you make it, if it's low hydration, it's gonna look a little bit different, maybe feel a little bit different. But to begin, all the water in. I'm going to start by adding the salt. And the reason I do this is because I want to dissolve it. By dissolving it, you get the flavor of the salt. In my opinion, you get the flavor of the salt dissolved through the dough a lot more evenly. Now that the salt's worked in, we need to create a buffer. What I mean by that, because salt and yeast are the worst of enemies, they can't stand each other, it will kill the yeast if you add this in right now and they make direct contact. So by creating a buffer, you are simply adding in just a small amount of flour, I don't know, 10% of the flour. You're going to work that in, create an almost batter-like consistency. It doesn't have to be perfectly dissolved, by the way. You can have the little lumps in it and stuff. But by doing this, you're creating a barrier between the salt and the yeast. And your yeast can now thrive, because we kind of need it. Kind of essential, really. I've added in that flour. You can add in the yeast. Just going to work that around a little bit. It's not going to be, again, it's not going to be perfectly dissolved. You're going to see little lumps, but you're going to work them out of it once you get further in. You just kind of get, you're just trying to disperse it through the water a little bit at this point. With this recipe, we're just going to work in the flour bit by bit. So at this point, you're not going to overwhelm yourself and you're not going to overwhelm the dough, and you're going to get every last bit of it, this flour, dissolved and absorbed. And as you go, twist the bowl around and, you know, have a little bit of a feel about, get rid of any dry bits, clean your bowl as you go. But you just need one hand, keep one hand clean, using that on the side of the bowl to help you turn it, one hand inside, getting mucky. On to the next bit. All I'm trying to do here, by the way, is just kind of look for the little dry bits on the bottom. Make sure they're getting incorporated, and I'm just slapping it in, slap technique. In with the next bit. And I'll leave one last little bit in there, because I don't want to overcrowd it, overwhelm it with too much flour. Last bit of flour, and at this point I'm just folding it round. Folding that over using my knuckle, turning the bowl, folding it in. So, this is what the dough looks like at the minute. It still looks a little bit dry because there's a lot of surface flour still not absorbed, and there's a little bit of flour in there. That all needs to go in because it needs to match the hydration I'm trying to work with. And all I'm going to do now is tip that excess flour out. This is where the proper work commences, what I was saying earlier. So, as you can see, I'm just trying to pick up any dry bits of flour at this point. All of this flour is included in the recipe, so it doesn't need to be wasted. Just rolling it about and picking up the dry bits of flour. Okay, shaggy piece of dough. No gluten formed or very little gluten formed at this point. How I knead my dough, straightforward. I bring it over, creating some air underneath and just a gentle push away. When I pull it over and fold air inside and then push it away, I am giving it a turn, so it's getting an even knead all the way. So if that makes sense, so let me see if I can do it in a way that it makes sense. This hand is my turning hand and my folding hand, if you like. So I'm using that hand to fold over and turn. So every time I'm folding it, I'm folding it over these fingers and then I'm turning at the same time. Now that might be a bit unnecessary for a lot of people. I would suggest maybe just starting with the good old-fashioned pull it over and knead. Few kneads till it elongates. You've got a nice sausage now. Turn it, fold it over, not the whole way, just half or quarter, and then continue to do that way. You're folding it over, you're folding it over, and you're rolling into a sausage. Two hands. Fold, you've got your sausage again, fold it over. Easy. I would advise at this point to start a timer for 8 minutes, or 10 minutes if you're new to it and you feel like you need a little bit more time. But put a timer on because that's all you need. Okay, I'm done kneading this. There's several ways you can tell that you're done. You can do the standard push. Does it bounce back? Yes. You can get a thermometer. You can jam it in. You're looking for an internal temperature of 23 to 26 degrees Celsius. Another way that I like, you take a little bit of the dough and just gently stretch it. Yeah, this is called a window pane test. You see, you get this little pane, this little screen, whatever you want to call it. That is your gluten network. It's started, but if you look closely, it's not fully formed. You can sort of see some of the striations of the gluten forming. It's not smooth, it's not perfect, it's not super strong. It will tear easier, as you can see, but it's formed. That's what you're looking for. Sort of striated window pane that's formed, yeah? That is a great way to see that you have done the necessary work. So, incorporate that back into the dough. As you can see, I've got this nice soft smooth texture on top of the dough. I've created that by one, folding over and dragging the dough. As you can see underneath, I'm using the friction on the counter to create that lovely smooth texture on top. Number one is finished. Number two, rest. Now what you're going to do is cover the dough ball with a wet towel. We're gonna let that rest for 2 hours. 2 hours. When you leave that dough to rest, it doesn't just sit there and do nothing, which I guess the term rest certainly implies, but when it's resting, during that period, it's still continuing to absorb flour, still continuing to build those bonds, and the gluten network will grow and strengthen, and I'm going to show you the proof of that.
2 hours later.
So you're gonna need scales and something to put your dough in. Now, I want, as I said earlier, 3 250 gram dough balls. Traditionally, Neapolitan pizza, dough ball for Neapolitan pizza is somewhere in the region of 220 grams to 250 grams to be authentic. Any larger than that, from my experience, you just end up with a slightly more doughy pizza, which if that's your preference, go for it. But for me, it's not. You can either just, which I've done over time, I'm just folding it in with my fingers, smoothing it off. And during that process, I've incorporated air inside the dough ball, and I've got a nice supple little dough ball, little air pockets kicking around in the surface there. Not sticky because again I've tightened it up, I've closed the bottom, and I can pop that in there. If this is your first time, take your top, flip it round, fold in a corner, fold in another corner, fold in the other corner, fold in that corner, just working your way around in a circle till you get back to the start and you have formed a dough ball, essentially. Now, to finish the dough ball, you can either cup the dough ball, roll it like that, just back and forth. Each time you bring it back, you're building more surface tension with these fingers. You bring it back, you're rolling it, rolling it, rolling it. There you go, you've got a dough ball. Or when you get to that point I was showing you earlier, you can simply get it between your hands, or quite simply flip it round, pinch it all together, because the dough ball is going to be sticky, it's going to adhere to itself. 3 beautiful dough balls.